Thank you all for choosing this particular workshop. We will be talking about modelling the future rights of nature in South Yorkshire, but we'll also be recognising the rights of nature is but a milestone within the wider journey. So what we're going to do is structure it in a way where we'll have a bit of a generative inquiry, so a little bit of an opportunity to talk to one another, set the tone, and then I'll go through the framing of a crisis and our understanding of that. And then from there we'll justify the need for a demonstrator project, and then within that discuss how the River Dôn project is one of a sequence of demonstrator projects within Opus, which is the company that we've worked for. And at the end we'll have an open discussion with a few provocations, and you can see whether or not, or challenge, preferably critique, but yeah, that would be my preference anyway. So, as I've mentioned, the framing will be the collective intelligence, the complex problems, and then we'll look at the demonstration, a little bit on River Dôn project, the structure that we're using, the platform to which Johnny will be speaking to, and then questions as capabilities are emerging. So the question that we want to lead with, do you want to?
Yeah, so with all of this, I think we do the other one. I think that's probably better. So with all of this, it's starting from this really kind of different position that's been alluded to this morning, which is accepting that we don't know the answers to these problems, and if we adopt that almost Victorian mentality of this kind of, and if we kind of adopt that Victorian mindset of kind of picking a problem, trying to fix it, and then moving on to the next thing, we're missing the complexity and interwoven nature and the interdependence within the reality of what we live. So, as a precursor to this, we acknowledge the fact that in doing this project, it is very much an invitation to go on a journey together, because we certainly don't have the answers. And the way we think about it is that we acknowledge the fact that we probably don't even have the language to articulate the problem properly. And that's a really important point for us all to try and start from, because it takes a long time to shift yourself into that mindset, because we all have this inbuilt sort of ideology of the problem-solving approach when we come to these things, and that is one of the things that's causing us problems. So one of the ways that we often approach this when we're getting into it is what's called generative inquiry. So it's, as has been done a little bit this morning, it gives people the opportunity to center themselves where they are and delve into what they actually think and feel about a certain situation. So a generative inquiry question, as we're going to do it, is a little 10-minute exercise. We're going to break into threes. There's 6 of us. It's a nice division of numbers there. But what you will be given the opportunity to do is speak uninterrupted for 3 minutes in response to this provocation. At what crossroads do you or we find yourselves standing at this moment in time? Now, these questions are intentionally ambiguous, so that there is no clear and obvious answer. They are intentionally anxiety-inducing, as in there's an element of that uncertainty and that element of making you feel something as well as thinking it. We're not trying to actually induce kind of anxiety, but it's on the fringes of that. And the intention of it is for you to be as heard as possible by the other 2 people that you are sat with. So again, our natural kind of inclined, socialized need to respond, to reply, to kind of, if you get a voice inside your head going, I remember a time when I did that, that's you not being present, and you need to acknowledge that and just recenter yourself and try and hear and experience everything that that person is sharing in that 3 minutes. If they pause, that's fine. You don't need to prompt them. You don't need to do anything to assist them. If you end up like talking for 30 seconds, sitting for a whole minute, which will be agonizing and terrifying, with them not saying anything, that's fine, because they're probably processing down to something that they're then going to say that they probably weren't even expecting themselves to say. So it seems harder than it is. It is a weird experience the first time you do it, but that's intentional, because we want the whole person to surface their thoughts and feelings in the moment. So we will leave you to divide yourselves however you would like. It probably makes sense to move away in each of the threes, however you want to sit, just so you're not overhearing the other person because it's quite a small room. If you can sit sort of close enough that you're comfortable with the intimacy, but it is an intimate conversation, perhaps not too close. And whoever wants to go first, feel free to do so. If you can't decide, standard paper, scissors, stones rules apply. Whoever loses goes first. And when the person has finished their 3 minutes, just if you want to say thank you, that's fine, but absolutely no need to comment or feedback. We'll do that collectively once everyone has had the opportunity to speak. If one of you wants to time, that's really useful. So if someone has a watch to hand rather than getting the phone out, that can be great. But just, 3 minutes, speak or pause, reflect, as long as you go, and then as soon as you're done, just hand over. And it's whatever you think and feel in response to that provocation. It could be what you do as a day job, it could be something completely unrelated. Don't feel the need to run off your LinkedIn profile. Everybody is qualified by being here in the room. It's not what you've done before. You don't need to prove anything to anyone. It's an opportunity to share what you are thinking and feeling in this moment, right now, while we're all here together in response to that. Nor will at this point get asked any questions. I'm not going to ask you that because you've got all the information you need, however uncomfortable or uncertain it might feel. Okay? Cool. If you want to shuffle yourself into however you want to
no
sit.
offenses, you know.
What I really like is almost
If you want to sit here and
it's
go. I think they just go.
I always say
I know some of them, but it's just that we both saw wearing the SSN hat.
No, I was going to.
You're wearing
I'm
the
revolution.
hat.
Sorry.
Right, okay. All right. So you're about to talk over. So you know, it was in
Need to go compassionate and Sheffield view.
Ah, right.
Need more time to.
Oh, you have your side.
Accept 3 minutes time as well.
Yeah. Are you
Yeah.
next time? Yeah. fine.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
So, setting a time crossroads.
I can do that if you want to go
We'll
first.
start at 7 crossroads, but one that.
Okay.
came
Are you
to
going to set
mind
the timer?
is
3 minutes.
My relationship with my children.
Crossroads.
Watching from twins who are 16.
I don't know why I'm going first.
Daughter who is
20,
20,
your son is
22.
22. But I did
Separated from the mother, but really very close to them. Relationships that were very far between them. But because the kids are getting older,
is
they're
closer to
dependent
the point,
and
but I'm a long way
my
from
ex-wife
where
never
he
sort of
was
set
as a
their
problem.
social calendar.
And
So it used to be that they came to me every weekend.
working
for 2
for
nights
business
every week.
that
The client
claims to be
is no longer
environmental
within our control.
with a
So
stewardship
they are,
company, which is
contract they are, and
comes
comes
in
in
as evolution, which is
So
a
that's something
training
comes to
environmental.
it's a crossroads about how I recalibrate and it's certain elements of
I feel we're fixing and healing what we can want
in terms of how I keep
the other time, the other hand, we're not actually
how I
solving
stay involved,
underlying problems,
my roles
shifting
changing
paradigms in a sense.
in their lives. So yeah, that's
Levers we're pulling,
the other crossroads that become
small
quite
enough, and don't do much. And I think the big challenge is
probably more
engage
it's different between the four books and some of the which I
enough
so
people
there's more geographical distance between me and
really understanding what in society that says, okay,
that will create
people
geographical
there
distance
need to do things
twins will be in
differently.
2 years so
We have
living in my
read
life
bits
is
about
more
this,
challenging
and
and
I
I think
think
this geographical distance
10,
makes it
15,
more
20,
natural
30%
less in touch but it's
society starts to
with the twins
feel a certain way about
and then being a mile away and not seeing them as much
roughly come together. Society as a whole, the political class,
I don't know, just sort of, I don't want to say management because that's
then
not
can kind of make a move,
I think I want to make an effort
way of
to
thinking. self assessed and get that. Enough in society, I'm telling you, to make something wrong about that, we shouldn't be getting outrage now. So I get not everybody, but society as a whole seems to be saying so. Why did we ever think it was wrong? Why did we ever fight against something like this? So it's probably something to be tackled in the autumn. And it's so for me,
Yeah, exactly.
the social enterprise we've got potential to move society to the point where we can get to that point where we suddenly say, activity by shifting the business model. It's absolutely obvious. Why are we ever doing it the way we did it before? But there's a long way to go. Capitalism,
Okay, so
that whole thing needs
I guess similar to what you said, I find myself in quite a lot of different kind of crossroads at the moment. So, and I think often very kind of intertwined.
They seem to go very quick.
Yeah, I think
It was,
one
well, no, I
crossroad,
thought it
important
was slow
crossroad
at the start
is
because they did it.
career-wise, so I was working at university,
Okay.
academic,
Right, who's going next?
academic
And I'll be the timer.
sort of more than a decade, so I sort of kind of know what I'm doing in kind of the academic space at the same time. Sort of find yourself in the kind of position that you're also sort of aware of, let's say, I'm not saying that a lot of what we do is meaningless, but like you're kind of aware of a lot of the problematic aspects of higher education, of research, of all these sorts of things. So, certainly one of the tensions and challenges that I do have is often there's lots of incentives into the workplace to kind of almost do stuff that doesn't matter that much, that it's hard to see having much impact outside of kind of the academic world, but at the same time probably to progress in the academic world actually a lot of the kind of the impact stuff, me being here today for instance, probably a lot of colleagues will say, well, why are you coming just because a lot of that type of work unfortunately isn't valued in kind of the academic space as much as I think it should be. So this crossroads of to be honest, sort of thinking, well actually do I stay in academia, do I try and find something else? I mean, I've been at University of Sheffield for a long time, PhD here, master's degree. I went away for a while and still came back to Sheffield and things. I find somewhere else, I think still face similar challenges at other places in certainly the UK system as a whole. So yeah, there's that crossroads. I think one of the things as well is that I'm conscious of it. You spend academia is very lots of careers are, but it's just the volume of work, the expectations, the number of things that you're supposed to deliver is huge. And one of the personal crossroads that I have is I sort of have a daughter who's 4 and then another child on the way, and increasingly you kind of think, well, I'm working weekends, I'm working because is academia actually worth this amount of time that you sort of invested into it, and versus the kind of family stuff and things. So I've got personal crossroads, work crossroads, and I'm moving house as well. So I've got quite a few things all going on to try and juggle.
Just on 3 minutes.
No, I'm ready to talk. I just want to
I can see the layers of the room.
Should I just have this one?
Yeah, absolutely. So, crossroads. I think I've had a period in my life, last 10 years or so, I'd say it's felt very stable, very happy because of that. I'm aware of the fact that my parents are getting quite a lot older now. And I think in comparison to a lot of my peers, I'm likely, it's likely that so I heard a fair decade, 50 years before, so I'm aware of how much stability I've had, and that I'm not sure how I will respond to that next step, that next occurrence. And then also how my parents would respond to that as well, how my sister would respond to that, and all of the sort of family connections that would be tested and twisted. Yeah, all the pressure on that. So I think within a personal context, there's that feeling of being aware that there is after that moment, whenever that is, but not the lack of certainty around when that is. That's how I know that in the background. I'd also say, in terms of the more external climate and the sort of world around us, so I found maybe about 6 months ago I turned off the news notifications on my phone. It's been one of the best things I've done for mental health. However, I feel it's also meant that I'm less aware of world events. And yeah, some of that will be pointless world events, some of that will be really important stuff that I should be engaging with, or I feel I should be engaging with. So I think what I'm also aware of is that within this sort of crossroads of wanting to connect, support, give the best of myself to those issues, that I find that to do that also can come at the detriment of my own sort of health and well-being, and whether I'm best able to support in that space, and whether sort of protecting my better well-being allows me to be more supportive and decide what causes are the ones that I should really champion in, instead of feeling like I need to look myself up to everything. I don't feel like whatever I'm supporting is valuable, so I think it's a crossroads in the sense that I feel there's something that will be the next step to the catalyst will change where I would then lead to something, but I'm just not quite sure, so I think there's an element of knowing that there's a homeostasis at the moment, but the feeling that that's not far to inflict and then something changes.
I think I'd be going,
So I think it's kind of pressure. I also started the job in just 2 months into it now, so I'd say I'm just past the crossover that in terms of new career direction. So I kind of feel like it's starting with positive change in that, which is good. So I think it's looking at how I can capitalise on wherever that positive changes and stability I've had over the last 10 years with family stuff, and then sort of 6 months or so with frustrating news. I'm trying to think how I can use that at this crossroads to make the right decision about where I go to next.
Change in my psyche to make sure that this becomes one of my thoughts. Because I can read all the science papers in the world, but if it doesn't actually bring into my consciousness, I don't think I'm making a change.
I heard beeps that sounded like that was the end of the 3 minutes. You could say sat in your kind of threes-ish if you want, if you feel more bonded and connected, but if you just want to spin around so you can see the screen. So obviously we are up against the clock and overrunning in general terms for today, but I think we're going to catch that up this afternoon because one of the sessions is not going ahead. So still going to take the opportunity for you to share anything that has kind of surfaced for you while having that conversation. It might not have been something that you said, it might be something that came out of your mouth that surprised you as you were saying it, or it might be something that you ended up feeling or thinking because of what someone else said. We don't need to kind of do a report on what was said, it's genuinely whether anything is more visible or alive for you now that wasn't 11 minutes ago before you had that conversation.
One thing I noticed, and without any judgment on it, is that we all filled the 3 minutes almost exactly. So I don't know if that's because we felt pressured to, but I think I can only talk about myself really. I think I probably did feel a bit of pressure to fill the time, rather than I think from my point of view, a pause might have been quite effective in terms of me thinking about what I was going to say and other people thinking about what I'd said. But I felt the need to keep talking. And I can't speak for other people, but the three of us did talk more or less non-stop for 3 minutes.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think I'd say to answer that, I kind of realise how much is sort of just under the surface. So I sort of wouldn't, the things I was talking about, I'm aware of, but I wouldn't really put them together in that same way. But I think you kind of realise when you meet someone on the surface level at this kind of event and you sort of networking, you're kind of talking in sort of this space, and then we just sort of talk briefly when we were getting a coffee before, but then like now it feels you're in quite a different space. So I think it's interesting how quickly you can get into that deeper space, and then how much value you can get from a conversation with a stranger in that sense.
Yeah, nice. And I think, yeah, we are so socialised to have our social camouflage on and our kind of like spiel the things that we always say at these events when we're bumping into people in a certain context. And that kind of underpins a lot of this work as well, like how we're not reinventing anything or creating something from scratch. It's kind of looking at things a little bit differently.
Yeah, because you said at the beginning that the question is designed to be moderately anxiety-inducing, and I suppose that then kind of sets you off talking about something that you have a bit of anxiety about, and which means it's less about the solutions and more about the problem to some extent. And I felt I was talking about a problem. Yeah, Nick was talking about a problem. Yeah. And Veronica was more of the solution, but questions. But yeah, certainly me. That's why I preceded it with I think.
Sorry, I know David prior to showing up here today.
No worries. Was there anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I would, because I think I came here because it said the River Dôn project, and I thought it would have been about nature. I've heard a bit about the project. I have a business that is near to the confluence of the rivers Dôn and Sheaf. So I thought, oh right, I come and hear something about this. But then when I came into the room and then the instructions you gave would say about the crossroads, I realised that no, what I wanted to speak would not have been specifically about the River Dôn project, but it was in fact a broader picture, a wider aspect of it. Biodiversity, yes, as part of it has to do with livelihoods, but I was more concerned about having more joined up thinking and the need to be able to look at the environment and people and biodiversity and all that would go into moving society or us or forward in a way in which you say, whether you're a business for profit or whether you're a business social enterprise or charity, there is that need to have that joined up thinking rather than the traditional siloed approach. So I think that surprised me in the sense that, well, I thought I would be talking about River Dôn, but the question was wide enough to say crossroads at this moment in time. So it didn't matter what you took. And for me, it was something I've obviously spoken about because I work in media sustainability, but it's this need for joined up thinking rather than a siloed approach, because it means that you then have more blind spots and rather than being open to the possibilities in terms of solutions, possibilities, and offering the solutions as such.
Thank you. Was there something you were going to add, or?
I think
no pressure to do
no,
so.
Well,
it's just...
I think it builds on what was said earlier about you get to a different depth when you talk for 3 minutes interrupted, in terms of both what you think, but then also actively listening to the others, understanding what they think. And there's an authenticity to that actually you're way more likely to get to understanding the problem in order to find the solutions. Because if we just float around in that often social media world or very short-term interactions, you never really get to the authenticity of anything. So
Yeah.
It was an interesting exercise for that.
Yeah, thank you. And I think there's, when we're talking about that authenticity, there's a depth to this, whereby not only do we probably not have the language to articulate this problem, the vast majority of us are feeling this, and we might have been speaking for the last 40, 50 years about the problem in words, but post-pandemic, a collective trauma that we all shared firsthand for the first time, I think has potentially surfaced a lot of the collective trauma and grieving that we all have for our current predicament, which is accelerating rapidly towards serious consequences. And part of all of this demonstration work and fundamentally the River Dôn project that hopefully starts to connect people together is how we sense into this, how we use technology to connect with things that are there or make visible the things that are there. And we often feel those things and experience them in a way that is here rather than here. But I will hand over to Alban for a bit of broader context with the caveat warning that any of this work, the more you start to understand, the more overwhelming and traumatic it is. But we are sharing that burden collectively.
And then next week, let me know. Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. And I always find it incredibly provocative, but also meaningful and purposeful, that exercise. And actually, I think I'll touch on a lot of that's been mentioned through our understanding and our journey in this experience. So let me have a look, yeah. So Opus, as an organisation, works to create and support responses to achieve urgent systems change. And we do this by telling stories, bringing people together and demonstrating alternatives. Now don't worry, I'm not going to read from the slides all the way along, but and this is one of those stories I'm going to try and tell you a little bit. And it actually starts with collective intelligence. So the premise of that, similar to the problem-solving aspect, we're exceptional at narrow boundary goal setting. We have a housing crisis. We can build more housing. We obviously need the political will and the instruments, but exceptional at being able to achieve that. The issue with that narrow boundary goal setting is that you don't look at the problem holistically. You don't recognise the problem as a whole, so you don't have a wide boundary. So when we're looking at the housing crisis at present, and then Labour coming out, I think, 300 per year, if I'm not mistaken, something along those lines, they're not then discussing the Paris Accord and our carbon targets. They're not then discussing the way that that's going to affect investment in other areas of a green belt response to that. So what I'm suggesting is that actually, when we look at the way that we've institutionalised ourselves, when we look at the way that our culture sort of creates these deep codes in our understanding of what the problem even is, it creates a few issues. So I'll use two for an example. Democracy in of itself is brilliant for being inclusive. We can debate all day about the level of that democracy and the periods of that inclusivity, because obviously that's changed over time and will change. But it's horrendous at long-term planning. There's reasons for that. That can be mitigated. I'm not saying go for authoritarianism. I'm not suggesting that. But it's unfortunate the way that we've presented it and created it has that short side. Second, our free market approach, our understanding of that doctrine of itself will mitigate some of these problems, is brilliant for applying a cost to a commodity, whatever that commodity is. If it's smoking, if it's a tree, if it's something in fintech, for example, excellent. But it's horrendous at understanding the externalized costs. So they're two parts of our wider collective intelligence system that are just sort of so pervasive in our everyday that limit our ability to understand the problem. So then I want to talk a little bit about three aspects of crises. Meta-crisis, polycrisis, and permacrisis. Actually, I'm going to do that in reverse, and I'll go through each one in particular. So first is our understanding of a permacrisis. So it's these three sets that we understand the wider problem at hand. So within the permacrisis, it's compounding. So a once-in-a-generation flood is no longer once in a generation. The concern around that is that our ability to react is reduced with every occurrence. Now that, in of itself, is scary, and it's felt differently when we're talking about, like, from a geographic perspective. One within the global south, another within the global north, and then our attempts to then mitigate those consequences, we have less and less time to do that at every event. So how we react in this occasion will affect how we're able to react in the next occasion. Now, if you couple that with a polycrisis, so for one, it's compounding, and for another, it's intersectional. Now, I used the example earlier around housing and the way that we can't sense into that complexity because we're not having a holistic conversation about the problems that we're facing. So not only does a polycrisis, for example, in a sense, force us to miss a lot of the consequences to our actions, we're not also able to plan accordingly, because we no longer live in a reality where we have one problem and a solution without that solution affecting a multitude of variables. And those variables exist within a permacrisis framework, so if it affects it in a negative way, and that once in a generation flood or fire happens, it will then happen again at a quicker rate, because we're experiencing climate breakdown. We've been experiencing it for a while, actually, just at different rates. So then what we have to do is sense into that complexity, which we're not very good at doing. We're not having those honest conversations, really. And suggesting that actually this isn't just climate breakdown, this is also a conversation around justice and equity, around, a process and a period of a reindustrialization for green technology, but how do you do that in an equitable way? And all these conversations, academically, there's space for that, and it is happening at a slow rate, but it's also not inclusive within the voices that it incorporates. And then also when you look at the political application of that, it's very difficult to then see policy that's proactive. So then as you hold these two spaces, one where we're not sensitive to the complexity, another where our ability to react is reduced time and time again, you then also have a meta-crisis. Now this is actually a crisis of ontology, of being, of understanding. We live in a current society that has extractive logics. So by that, a dead tree is worth more than a live tree, because we attach value to that dead wood in a way that we can create a commodity, not value to the carbon that the tree sequesters. That's changing, but nonetheless, that's usually been the fundamental logic. Second, we've also got underlined exponential technology. Now, I think it's referred to as the Jevons paradox, where we would have hoped that the more efficient we become with our technology use and energy extraction, the less we would actually use. What's happened is that the more efficient we become, the less of a cost that is, and then the more we produce, especially as we go to expanding our markets and exports. So actually it's done the reverse. So we've built that scale even faster. And then finally, we've got rigorous dynamics. So in securitization, in model systems analysis, we're consistently rival to the other. And we can go back towards the British and the French. You don't even have to go over in different of ethnicities. Right? Even that relationship is rigorous. The Americans of the European Union. And then we also look at the way that permeates not only within our community and how we've established that, but also within our geopolitics. So instead of looking for mutually assured flourishing, we're actually working towards mutually assured destruction, because we can't sit across a table. Never mind our own communities, obviously that's difficult enough, but then a geopolitical space. To say that we are consistently, collaboratively experiencing these events. So how do we work together? So I've got a few images to sort of like highlight how they're all then facilitating the self-terminating system. A much more scary version of self-terminating system, but actually this is the scariest version of the self-terminating system, because 6 of our 9 planetary boundaries have been surpassed. This is what we would like to achieve, so that we hit that regenerative and distributive economy, so we can have a social foundation for all, while sticking within the within the limits of our biosphere, essentially. Now, one thing that's news is definitely not the right word, sorry, I stood this for a bit too long. It's incredibly concerning is that even at this rate, with the amount of resources that we use and produce, we are still not hitting the social foundations within the UK, never mind the inequality at a global level, and we're far exceeding our planetary boundaries already. So there's a conversation politically around how do we redistribute resources, not just climate breakdown. Because how do we achieve this for all at a certain level of equity, while sticking within those boundaries, which we're already not doing, whilst we're already not achieving that. To be fair, I didn't warn you this was going to be a fun conversation, but let me keep going. So in I know for the time. So Opus, in a sense, is attempting to understand that, to sense into that complexity. So we've got a multitude of projects that are on at this moment in time with a multitude of partners. And the premise of that is to create demonstrator projects that can show an alternative reality. Demonstrator projects that can go from radical reform within the existing system of oppression to demonstrating a genuine alternative reality. And the reason that we feel that this is imperative is because as things continue to get worse, if that's politically, socially, economically, or from a climate lens, we will be looking at knee-jerk reactions, potentially more than likely populism, is what usually tends to happen. So what we need to do as a community is demonstrate actually that there are alternative ways of being, and we've shown pockets of it within a city scale that can then scale to other. But if we don't do that, how can you then challenge a narrative that creates or reframes a problem and shows that the only solution is further securitization? So demonstrators are projects, networks or platforms, or a combination of the above, which show how innovations in future system capabilities and civic capacities could operate to bring about change, which is proportionate to the challenge we face, and proportionate is definitely a key aspect of that, not radical reform. And then that leads me, and you, Johnny, very shortly, to the River Dôn project. And just before I hand it over, I just wanted to briefly touch upon who we are. Unique collaboration, multidisciplinary partners. So as you can see, Sheffield Hallam, Noise for Nature, SYSC, Urban Flows Observatory, Dark Matter Labs, Doncaster Rivers Trust, and Sheffield for Data is no longer with us, so we need to change that. And we have a unique governance structure. I'll briefly go over this. Usually what tends to happen when you enter a contract within an organisation or within a project, you go one-to-one, so you provide a service and I enter that relationship. Or, for example, at university, it's one-to-many. The university being the sole, and then the many entering the contract within it. A very expensive contract I had, as I do masters. But what we're trying to do is that we create the governance structure from the centre within that mission statement, and then we independently enter it. We share our assets, we share our risks. We also share the IP. So nobody owns that, but it's part of the project in of itself, for it to be open source, for it to be transparent. And then now it's moving on to...
So I'm going to fly through this because I'd like us to have the opportunity to talk about some of the provocations at the end. But we currently have about 5 work streams within this project. One is looking at legal stuff. There's the governance stuff where we're literally trying to build something from the ground up that is genuinely different. And as I was explaining, this is hopefully going to be one of the first of about 5 demonstrator projects. So we're using this as a learning mechanism that will then inform a similar collaborative approach around energy, around food, potentially around finance, and how we actually pay and resource things from the ground up, having a similar kind of exploration of what are the other alternative models, like the governance systems, where if we can't address how things are funded, then nothing will ever change. And then a 5th one, which is, I think, still in discussion, it might be something around democracy, where working with partners, we're looking at how you bring conversations and decision making down to a neighbourhood level, which is, again, really, really interesting. But the River Dôn project is furthest ahead of that. We have an arts and culture strand in this, we have a legal strand in this, we have the engagement platform, which I'm going to talk about, we have the interface for care, and then it's governance, that's it. Community movement. Community, citizen science stuff. Yeah. So we're building this as we go, and we're engaging people in conversations. So this is an open invitation for anyone to join in, but to try and explain to you how we're sort of approaching this. The biggest issue we see in terms of the problem is that we can't actually see what currently exists and what we currently have. So we're not trying to sort of create a solution and sell it to anyone. We're trying to make what happens every day visible to everyone, if possible in real time, all the time, so that people can become more conscious and aware of the existence that they currently have. What that hopefully does is it brings people to the table for the reason that they're already engaged specifically with the river, but the river as a litmus paper of the health of the entire bioregion. So we picked the River Dôn because it flows, if you include the Dôn catchment, it flows through all 4 parts of South Yorkshire. And that boundary that we think of as a region, that we have some sort of identity association with, is also in and around the same as the bioregion. And the bioregion, just in case anyone doesn't know, is kind of the ecosystem in which everything is kind of circular within. So we think of the world, which is our planetary biosphere, but we all exist in bioregions ourselves, where there's a lot of interdependence and connectivity within those regions. And we pick the River Dôn so that that boundary is similar to a boundary that we already identify with, as arbitrary as that line on a map drawn by someone at some point and then modified for voting changes. It's kind of totally pointless. But it's something that people connect with. So people can associate it with that, but also it hopefully means that people that work in a specialism or a discipline in which they need to silo themselves to be expert enough in order to excel in that discipline can also arrive with that as a gift and look at what other people are working on and what other people are doing. So that rather than trying to fix the problem, we can try and wield the power of technology to assist everyone to see the problem better. And what we're looking to do with that is really explore our relationship with the river itself. So there's been a number of examples in other countries where they've usually used indigenous rights frameworks in order to elect people to speak on behalf of a river or another natural asset. We're not looking to do that, and we're certainly not making technology the ends. We want to use it to surface and make visible what's already there. So the technology becomes the means. And we can use that technology to create a space that inspires and engages people to contribute and come with whatever they've got to give. Like, there are people that have 4th or 5th generation fished in the Don because their guardians taught them and their guardians taught them before them. They are as intimately connected, if not more intimately connected, than a kind of world-leading hydrologist who knows loads of stuff about the liquid that's actually in the river basin. So what we want to do is give the ability for those people to come together and articulate what they can contribute to the situation. And what we're building is what we're calling an engagement platform. So you've probably come across lots of different sorts of dashboards that exist out there. And with Hive IT, who have kind of come on board as a partner, we're using technology to surface, visualize, and better understand the relationships, information, and data sets we already have. In holding this space, we want to let people bring what they have and what they're intimately connected to already, so that they can have that initial connection and everybody cares and is engaged as much as they are, and they can see other people that are engaged and care as much as they do, so that we can start wielding their knowledge, their resource, and their skills to start changing things. And the platform itself will hold all of those specialisms in different layers. So you will be able to arrive and look at the thing that interests you and then switch on and off other layers and see how that might correlate to all sorts of other disciplines. But that's not just going to be hard data set layers where we are looking at water level or temperature or turbidity or whatever it might be. It will be layers of information that people can contribute by, this is the picture of the sunset, this is what I was thinking and feeling this morning when I walked the dog. There will be layers where people have the opportunity to write a poem to the river. There will be layers where people will have the opportunity to observe wildlife, insects, the flora or the fauna in it. And what we're looking to do in feeding all that information into the system and holding the complexity of that, because it's effectively driven off a spreadsheet in the background, and because we have the Urban Flows Observatory as a partner, what we have is the ability to hold that information and then look at the different thresholds that affect different elements that feed into the system. So you can look at the platform from the perspective of the salmon, and when we put in the criteria of what affects salmon, it will flag on that layer as causing harm if the water drops below a certain level, if the temperature goes up above a certain level. We can give that perspective from lots of different perspectives. So you might be interested in river flies. You might have done the kind of DCRT, River Catchment Trust, river fly counting thing. The thresholds that affect the river flies may be very different to the thresholds that affect the salmon. So what we want to do is create this ability for you to sense into the system from non-human perspectives, as well as see the collective perspectives of all of the contributors. And every single one of those layers will have a feedback loop that will have calls to action in it, and you will be able to build your relationship over time. We're going to have an element of kind of gamification, tokenization of those actual acts of care, or so you can actually track your progress and your relationship with the river. And in doing this, because we're feeding into these like hard data sets, soft data sets, and warm data sets through the citizen science, through counting wildlife, through taking observational photos and gathering evidence, we start to build a database and a complex system of what's actually going on, and we start to surface some of the relationships that take place. And that gives us the ability to start doing some really exciting things. Because what that moves us to in having those data sets is, so Dark Matter Labs, who are one of the partners on this, the interface for care is actually a ChatGPT-4 underpinned chatbot that will allow you eventually to speak directly to the river. We're not using AI to represent the river. The data sets that you will feed in, that you will be able to see on the platform, will also be accessible by the chatbot, by an API in the Urban Flows Observatory, so that not only will it have hard data set, real-time information going in, all of the intersectional relationships that have been submitted over that week will give the river, in effect, in inverted commas, a sense of how people are feeling towards it, how the animals are doing within the river in that week. So when you ask it a question, how are you feeling today, it will respond based on all of those data sets and all of that information. And what that starts to do is fundamentally shift our perception of the living world and ecosystems in which we are existing in. Not because we've humanized the river to kind of give it a voice, but because you can actually contact and interact with what is going on in real time. We're also hoping, if we can find the funding for it, the University of Sheffield have got a high resolution precipitation radar, which is about 60k install and about 7-8 grand a year to run, but that will give real-time precipitation better than any weather app, so you don't have to do that shitty thing where you argue over who's got the better app and what is actually going to happen with the river. It will give us high resolution, 125 mile radius weather information going in. So when you remember learning about the water cycle as a kid, looking at the textbook and you see it go up and down and around again, we will have that real time going in, where the water is falling, what's happening. We'll have sensors in the river, and we will complete that textbook water cycle while starting to map all of the different layers of absolutely everything that's going into the system. What that hopefully then allows us to do in applying some degree of blockchain tokenomics to that, we're talking to the Regen Foundation in the States about this, is we want to use legal personhood in the way that companies use legal personhood to get the river some sort of recognition in the eyes of the law. Because if we can do that, we can get it a bank account. If we can get it a bank account, we give it the ability to transact with the bioregion and South Yorkshire. It gets us to the point where, well, some of the things we're playing with is, when you sit down at a planning meeting with the council, is there a screen sat at one of the chairs where you don't have to get a lawyer to bullshit how you get around the nature rules that allow you to put this chicken farm or this new development on? You literally have to talk directly to the river and prove to it how you are not going to cause it harm. When a CSO puts shit into the river, wouldn't it be wonderful if that alerted on a camera that we've taught an AI to register sewage outflow, because we're probably not going to get to put a sensor on the pipe because they'll be privately owned by the water companies, but if we can see it happening, what if the river issued the fine to the offending harm causer and they paid directly into the river? In exploring who owns the riverbanks and who is like owning a lot of this using the land trust, if the river has a bank account, the ability to transact, can the river effectively buy back its land over time? Can people leave in their will, rather than something to the National Trust, they can leave it to the river? So all of these things are what we're starting to explore that start from this point of sensing into what is actually there and evolving past our current set of thinking, because if you can take someone who does own a part of the river, it's hard to get them to instantly care. But if you can move them from one of ownership to responsibility, you can then have a conversation with them about responsibility to stewardship, which gives you the opportunity, as we describe all of this as a journey and a pathway, to have conversations with farmers about, well, if you spread this on your land when it's about to rain, then the money that you spend on all that fertilizer is just going to wash away and you lose the benefit of it. By the way, it also poisons the river to the point where it kills everything within like a 4-mile radius. But actually, there's a benefit to you. And hopefully by mapping all of this complexity in a way that's accessible to everyone all of the time, we're making everything transparent and we're giving people the opportunity to engage. To the point where we heard last week that Yorkshire Water are planning on putting 2,800 sensors along the Don, and we're going to have a conversation with them about, will that data be publicly available? Because that was like phase 4 or 5 of our project, and it's probably going to have the highest cost. But if someone else is going to pay for it, and we can feed in that sensory data, and we can offer them the opportunity to genuinely be transparent forms, we have an incredible technology kind of instigated way of sensing into the river in real time, adding the precipitation radar in, giving people the opportunity to put sensors into the catchment so we can look at the flows of water through the catchment from where it's falling, not just in the river. We connect about 350,000 people that live within an ecosystem together to have a conversation about what's actually going on. So that is our plan. It's ridiculous, I'm well aware of that, but we've got to be ambitious because the scale of the problem that we face is beyond terrifying, and the more you learn about it, the more terrifying and overwhelming it becomes. But the flip side of that coin is it is the greatest opportunity for us to be our best selves. And the reality is all change is born out of a crisis. And if we start building the alternatives now, when the shit really does hit the fan, and I mean like really hits the fan. COVID was the cocktail sausage before the starter, let alone the main course when we're talking about climate breakdown. But when that shit really hits the fan, if we build the alternative systems, when the current powers that be and the levers of power run around like headless chickens not knowing what to do, we will have a collective of people engaged in a potential way forward that allows us to jump ship to an alternative that means that we don't end up with that image that was on the screen a bit earlier with literally the whole world on fire. So, you're going to tell us we're out of time.
I was actually here to take photos.
Oh, okay, cool. That's all right. We'll eke it out for 2 or 3 minutes. So we just thought we'd finish on this and see whether anyone had any thoughts, opinions, ideas. There are a set of provocations. We're not expecting direct answers to them. You can take this away as a provocation and have a think about it. But it is the questions and the sorts of questions that we try to ask ourselves all of the time. And yeah, when you're in these kind of positions, you're often perceived as an authority with some sort of answers. We're very much of the opinion that anybody who pitches answers is the person you ignore immediately. And we need to better understand how we ask more interesting questions. I have got flyers if you want to connect with us retrospectively. We are at the point where we're starting to put the social media out there, but we've not really been focusing on that. We've been focusing on how we build it. But yeah, any thoughts, feedback, answers to these questions is very much appreciated.
If I allow you to ask a question, because it sounds all quite abstract in many ways, but the engagement platform's being built as we speak, so hopefully that will be done by the end of August, early September. The chatbot, we have a prototype, and we just need to transfer that and add colloquialisms essentially to that.
So the chatbot currently exists for a river in Taiwan, because 2 of the members of DML, Xu Yang and Fang, used to work for Audrey Tang, who's the first digital minister of Taiwan, and they have commissioned the building of that chatbot, and it does exist. And you were testing it the other day, and you put the
my Mandarin's a bit rusty, but
you provoked it in English, and it responded in English. And the guys that built it went, "Shoot, you haven't even tested it with English. Like, obviously it's in Taiwanese." But yeah, so the modification of that is an element of how we just make it suitable for the River Dôn, but it's built and it exists. And as Alvin says, the platform will hopefully launch at the end of August. It's halfway through its 45-day build at the moment. But yeah, sorry.
Thanks for sharing that insightful presentation. So there's quite a lot of joined up there. So my question is, how does provision of ecological services or ecosystem or the river as providing ecological services, you mentioned the water cycle, for example, how does costing of that fit into, or putting a value, which could be quantitative and qualitative to that, how does that fit into where you're seeking to take this forward in terms of the platform and actually the river becoming its entity?
Yeah, so there's some really interesting things that we need to work through, and we in the broadest sense about this is like one of the biggest issues we have is the way we value things. So as you were mentioning about the idea that a dead tree is worth more than a live tree, a dead fish is worth more than a live fish. Until that changes, there's going to be no chance of fundamentally steering us onto a genuinely different path. And therefore, the conversations we need to be having are, well, how do we value things differently? And that isn't about the commoditization and the dollarization of everything. It's how do we lean into this? And we think that the first stage of this is making what's invisible visible. Where that might go, there's a great episode of Amanda's Accidental Gods podcast where she is talking with Emily from DML. And I'll be honest, I listened to that episode, and it wasn't until the end, working on this project that as we do, that she was talking about something that I didn't even realise we were working towards, which is this idea of an alternative reserve currency that is underpinned by a value framework in which we view nature differently.
Sounds like an economics, I'm not an economist.
No, Emily is the economist.
Yeah, but it actually sounds like an economics dialogue we used to have, or I used to hear many decades ago, possibly, about how do you measure a country's GDP and resources, giving nature a value in its budget. And it reminds me of some work that Costa Rica, when they were at the forefront doing the work about paying for services provided by the ecosystem. So, well then, I'd certainly love to engage you, but the Costa Rica model comes to mind in terms of valuing ecological services.
Yeah, so just briefly, because I'm a master's in ecological economics, there's a real difficulty, I think, because of the anthropocentric approach to those equations. So when you look at government doing a more cost-benefit analysis, essentially within their policy, one of the things that I've recognised that my master's degree is sort of highlighting to me, is very competence consistently, but never mind, is that they can't externalise those costs particularly well. So our initial approach to that question is to actually surface those costs in a sense where you can model and understand not only the water's health, but obviously the flood risk and precipitation, but University of Sheffield's Social Observatory has got air quality measurement as well. So then, another question to that is, well, actually, if you add sensors to trees, not all trees, some trees, and you start to understand how much carbon we sequester, how much we reduce the temperature of the local environment, then you start to get a picture of those externalised costs. And then you can start to have those conversations about putting a value to that ecological service, because I think one of my concerns at this moment, through the studying, is that making it up carbon credits in and of themselves, there's no legitimate and rigorous exploration of that. You've got essentially insurance companies and banks looking at how they can sort of create a new industry with a very narrow boundary goal, which is carbon. And again, in of itself, it's a positive direction, but it misses so much.
I guess, probably building on what Veronica said, that I can see how I think it's a great project because it's looking at solutions and different ways of thinking. But what I was going on about in my own 3-minute diatribe was about sort of a tipping point. In other words, that people can say, oh yes, GDP is the wrong measure of the health of our economy, but we aren't at the point where people, not unanimously, but at that tipping point of enough people are saying, well, actually, nature first, given that that's what supports my very existence, is the way to think about things. So, yes, we need, like you say, when the shit hits the fan, here's a solution. It's still for me, I'm kind of constantly thinking, and that's the crossroads I'm at, is where and how are we going to get us all to a point where we say, quite logically, yes, we've got to do things differently. Now let's reach for these tools that people have been building.
So what we're, sorry.
Can you just briefly so like what you're discussing there is similar to what we at Opus attempted to do, is tell different stories. So the GDP perspective isn't of itself a story being told. This is post-World War, when they're looking at how they can understand what they're producing.
Yeah, but the point is, we all kind of believe that.
Yeah.
And think, well, are comfortable with it.
Yeah.
How do we move to this other paradigm where?
And I think there's, during those periods and processes of crisis, so when the social contract is at a breakdown, which it was for 14 years of austerity, and it continues to be to an extent, you start to look, well, actually this measurement isn't healthy. One of the challenges to that narrative is that within a neoliberal sort of dogma, it's that like a high tide raises all ships, and actually that's not true when you look at wealth inequality and how that affects a society. So a lot of the conversation outside of just the nature framework is, how do we challenge those illusions? How do we challenge those myths and origin stories in many ways? And actually look at utilising the data in a way to break those illusions. But you can't just do it through the data, because people feel more than what they read and what they see. So how do you then attach that data to express what they feel?
And there is some collective illusions that we need to unpick, but by building momentum. So there's some really interesting work that a polling company, a specialist polling company, done in the States, and they were looking at the question of how willing are you to make significant changes in your life to mitigate climate breakdown, and what do you think everybody else thinks? And the perception everybody had was that they, as an individual, willing to make change, was in the minority, and the majority of Americans would not be up for that. But because they asked that two-perspective question, when they got all the results through, and they did a 2,000 or 3,000 person survey, it was actually a super majority for, I will be willing to do this. It was like 65%.
Probably the same with paying tax, isn't it?
Yeah, but there's something really interesting there, because so much energy and resource is put into educate people about the problem. But if 10% of that energy was put into letting everybody else know that everybody else, the vast majority of people, thought as they do, it gives a permission and an opportunity for rapid change. To put this in the kind of context and scale of the River Dôn, as I say, we've picked it because it's the whole of South Yorkshire. It's 117 kilometres long, it's 506 square miles. Now, if we engage like one community group per kilometre all the way along the River Dôn, all of a sudden you're getting up to the kind of numbers that reach those tipping points. So you've got your 3.5% of your innovators, your 13.5% of your early adopters, and then there's that crossing the void gap thing, which gets you into the early majority. We're working with both of the universities. Every academic we speak to is just like, this is awesome, how can I put my data on your platform? So hopefully we'll have loads of data sets that will engage lots of different people. So how many people are in the fishing community along that region? How many people are in the walking community along that? How many people are in the kayaking? Yeah. All of a sudden you're up to a fair few thousand people. And if they actively engage one person, all of a sudden we're at that tipping point. And hopefully that's what gives us the momentum, alongside the fact that if we can demonstrate this practically, we have, as one of the first lines in the design brief working with Hive, not necessarily off the shelf, but we want to be able to, once this is up, running, tested and working, offer this to anyone in the world to use to protect the forest, the beach, the river, whatever they want to protect, and offer it out for them then to resource it. So that's where hopefully we get the scalability from.
Can I just feedback, because my mind is blown by this, and I'm so glad I came to this seminar. Obviously some people do this, some people don't know. I'm going to be very brief, but my social enterprise is called Open Gates Outdoors, and it's all about getting people who would naturally benefit from the outdoors into the outdoors for their own benefit, for their fitness, their well-being, their individual benefit. But I had never thought about turning on its head and thinking it's important these people get into the outdoors so they can take ownership and have a stake in their outdoors. So the community groups I work with, Zest in the Don Valley, Furvale in the Don Valley, Darnell, not sure if it is technically in the Don Valley, but all of these community groups, and one thing I really am passionate about doing, on top of what I'm already passionate about now, is getting qualitative data and feedback from these people to put into the chatbot. I've always been told there's benefits of AI, I haven't really thought what they are, but this is massive benefits of AI, giving the river a voice. I know Johnny had some objection saying giving the river a voice, but no, that sort of thing. So, that's another thing that Open Gates would like to help with, is collecting these voices that live in the Don Valley about what it means to them and how the river impacts on their life.
So obviously that's brilliant. And I think, and going back to the question of value, like until you surface those relationships, you can't put an accurate value on it, because it will always be economic, and you can't see the value. But like green scribing, for example, or even taking that ownership of your space and having that community feeling. But you can if you calculate that, if you create that data, and you can see it, from an ethnographic perspective. So this is like a very brief design process of what we're building. So for example, you create your own profile, and then within that you make particular pledges depending on your interest and capacity as well, may I add, and a part of that, for example, you can share a particular picture, and bear in mind these will be geolocated and time specific, so you can do a longitude study, not only with the primary data but the secondary data and real-time data as well.
And this is why we're calling it an engagement platform, because you will be able to submit something based on the thing that you care about, and then you will be able to go on the platform and you will be able to find your submission.
I suppose the question I've got is, what is the Don? Because the natural extension is in the Don Valley, so you look at Bartlett Springs, Winterbank Hill, which are actually in the Don Valley, but then do you look at tributaries, is the Porter relevant?
Yeah.
Is that effectively impacts on the health of the Don? Where is the Don?
But that's why we describe this as a journey, because however informed you are, or for whatever reason you engage, that is then the journey you go on, and they're the questions that we want people to talk about. It's like, well, if this is part of this, and then this is part of this,
and you don't know the answer.
No, and then you start to expand, and you hopefully I often use the metaphor of we're building a campfire, and everyone can just come and join the campfire, and you bring your own little bit of it, and you can spend as long as you want, but you can sit around, you can talk to other people about it, and those interactions that are hopefully get positive feedback loops that allow you to contribute, that allow you to see the difference that you make, that allow you to talk to someone else who then gets to see the difference that they've made, allows us to have these conversations that, depending on how you look at it, I think you change the world one person at a time. I don't mean that you can't do it en masse, but it's an intimate face-to-face conversation. If you can have a conversation because you've seen a beer mat in a restaurant next to the Don, and someone has heard about it and already submitted a photo because they took it when they were walking to work the other day, and then they engage that person, that's changed the whole a little bit. And if we can create the conditions to seed all of those conversations where everyone's feeding in collectively, and people see the value of the contribution that they can make, that isn't just about experts and I've got 3 degrees in this specialism. Them saying, this is the sunset I saw last night when I was walking the dog, and it made me feel this, and I needed that moment. That has as much value as one of those hard data points that's feeding in to go, a CSO pumped God knows how much shit into the water today.
And you can do both, and then cross-layer that as well, and saying actually, do people have less value to a part of the river that is polluted? And common sense would suggest yes, but when you're talking about people making those decisions, we haven't got that data. We haven't got that political will, because you can't surface attention. And this will surface attention in the sense that, it will highlight gaps that exist of things that are actually already being done by community groups. And they're both as valuable, because you're starting to understand the problem.
And the way this differs from...
Sorry, go on.
I was just saying it democratises, doesn't it?
Yes.
Because this is my favourite spot.
Yeah,
the ecologist
yeah,
says that's a rubbish spot.
Yeah.
So not all of this works all of the time as it's currently in build, but this is the kind of traditional access point. But what you will then be able to do is go all the way down to a city level, street level, control, you hold control.
Yeah.
And then you can split it in 3D, and you can literally go down to the street level, and you can see your observation, or you can see where you walk to work, and you can click on it, and you can interact with it in a way that it's not just a map from above.
But just because it excites me, so then if you've got a river sensor here, and it's fielding real-time data to this, and the chatbot's also got access, when you've got an increase in turbidity in that sensor, it'll flag it. So then in real time, you know, fucking hell, something's happening here. And then that individual's got that access. Now I walk this to work, I can do it, you know, take a little photo, because I mean, I've seen that there's an increase, and the chatbot will just ask for help. It'll say, oh, I've noticed in this particular river sensor at this geolocated place, there's been an increase in turbidity.
And you can sign up for alerts, but you can sign up for alerts based on this is a CSO causing harm to the river. Or you go, I fish, send me the alerts when the salmon or the whatever it is at harm, and I'll take a picture, and then they feedback contributing to the whole. Again, two-way interaction, real time.
Thank you for saying that.
Yeah.
Taking so much
Yeah.
time.